Marcus Thompson woke up early that morning, the sun barely peeking through his bedroom curtains. He had a big day ahead of him. Today was the day he would finally secure the loan needed to expand his tech startup. Marcus had spent years building his business from the ground up, pouring every ounce of energy into making it successful. His company wasn't just a source of income, it was his dream, his passion, and now it was ready to grow even bigger. All he needed was a little help from Capital Trust Bank. After showering and dressing in his favorite navy blue suit, Marcus grabbed his leather portfolio, containing all the documents he'd meticulously prepared for the meeting. The pages inside were neatly organized: financial statements, growth projections, and a detailed plan for how the loan would be used. As he walked out the door, he felt confident. He knew his numbers were solid, his pitch was strong, and his reputation as a reliable entrepreneur preceded him. This appointment wasn't just another routine visit to the bank. It was the next step toward achieving everything he'd worked so hard for. When Marcus arrived at the bank, he noticed how busy it already was. People filled the lobby, some seated in chairs while others stood in line at the teller windows. The air buzzed with activity, the clatter of keyboards, the hum of conversation, and the occasional ding of the service bell. Marcus approached the reception desk where Sarah Collins, the bank manager, sat typing away on her computer. Her nameplate gleamed under the fluorescent lights, but her expression remained cold and distant. "Good morning," Marcus said politely, offering a warm smile. "I have an appointment with Miss Collins at 10 a.m. Without looking up from her screen, Sarah gave a curt nod. "Take a seat. We'll call you when we're ready." Her tone was dismissive, almost robotic, leaving Marcus feeling slightly uneasy. Still, he brushed it off, assuming she was simply preoccupied with work. After all, banks could get hectic, and he didn't want to jump to conclusions. As he settled into one of the cushioned chairs in the waiting area, Marcus glanced around the room. There were several other customers present, but something quickly caught his attention. Within minutes, 2 women who had arrived after him were called up to the counter. A few moments later, a man in jeans and a hoodie, who looked like he hadn't planned his visit at all, was waved over by one of the associates. Yet despite being there for nearly 20 minutes, no one acknowledged Marcus. At first, Marcus tried to stay patient. Maybe there was a mix-up, or perhaps they were dealing with urgent matters. But as more time passed, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Every person who entered the bank after him was attended to promptly, while he continued to sit unnoticed. Each passing minute chipped away at his confidence and replaced it with frustration. Why was this happening? Was it because of the color of his skin? The thought lingered in his mind, though he hoped he was wrong. To distract himself, Marcus flipped through the pages of his portfolio, reviewing his notes one last time. He reminded himself why he was here: to fight for his dreams, not to let anyone diminish his worth. Still, the longer he waited, the harder it became to suppress his irritation. He glanced at his watch again. It had been 45 minutes since he checked in. Enough was enough. Marcus stood up and approached the reception desk once more, determined to find out what was going on. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a day that would change far more than just his schedule. Marcus approached the reception desk again, his footsteps firm but measured. He didn't want to come across as angry or confrontational, but he also couldn't stay silent any longer. The frustration bubbling inside him was hard to ignore. Standing there, he cleared his throat lightly to get Sarah's attention. She glanced up briefly, her eyes flickering over him before returning to her computer screen. "I'm sorry to bother you," Marcus said, keeping his tone calm and polite, "but I've been waiting for nearly an hour now. My appointment was scheduled for 10 a.m., and I just wanted to check if everything is okay." Sarah sighed audibly, as though his presence was inconveniencing her. Without looking up, she replied curtly, "We're running behind schedule today. It's a busy morning. Please take a seat. We'll get to you when we can." Her words lacked warmth or sincerity, and the dismissive wave of her hand made it clear she had no intention of prioritizing him anytime soon. Reluctantly, Marcus returned to his chair, feeling more invisible than ever. As he sat down, he noticed how the staff seemed to go out of their way to avoid making eye contact with him. One teller even turned her back slightly when their eyes met accidentally. It was subtle, but the message was loud and clear. He wasn't welcome here, or at least, not in the same way others were. Time dragged on, each tick of the clock amplifying his growing irritation. An elderly man shuffled in, leaning heavily on his cane. Within moments, a bank associate rushed forward to assist him, guiding him to a private office without hesitation. A young couple entered next, chatting animatedly about their plans to refinance their home. They too were greeted warmly and ushered to a desk within minutes. Meanwhile, Marcus remained rooted to his seat, watching the scene unfold like some sort of cruel social experiment. The murmurs around him began to grow louder. Other customers in the waiting area started exchanging glances, clearly noticing the disparity in treatment. One woman, probably in her late 60s, leaned toward her companion and whispered, "That poor man has been sitting there forever. Why aren't they helping him?" Her voice carried just enough for Marcus to hear, though he pretended not to notice. Another man nearby nodded in agreement, shaking his head disapprovingly. Despite the mounting tension, Marcus refused to let his emotions get the better of him. Instead, he focused on reminding himself why he was here, to secure funding for his business, something that meant the world to him. This wasn't just about pride. It was about creating opportunities for himself and his community. He couldn't afford to let this setback derail him. Still, the injustice gnawed at him, eating away at his resolve bit by bit. Every time he considered leaving, a small part of him urged him to stay. Maybe someone would finally call him up. Maybe this was all just a misunderstanding that would resolve itself soon. But deep down, Marcus knew better. The signs were unmistakable. This wasn't a random delay or oversight. It was deliberate, and it hurt more than he cared to admit. As the second hour crept by, Marcus felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him: anger, disappointment, and a heavy dose of disbelief. How could this be happening? In a modern bank, in broad daylight, surrounded by witnesses, no less. Yet here he was, still waiting, still ignored. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was a successful entrepreneur, respected in his field, yet reduced to feeling powerless in this moment. Just as he was about to stand up and demand answers, or maybe walk out altogether, the glass doors of the bank swung open with a sharp creak. 3 figures strode in, their polished shoes clicking against the tiled floor. Marcus barely registered their arrival at first, too caught up in his own thoughts. But when one of them locked eyes with him and broke into a wide, genuine smile, everything changed. For the first time that day, Marcus felt seen, not as a problem or an inconvenience, but as a person worthy of respect, and in that instant, he realized the tide might finally be turning in his favor. By the time the clock struck noon, Marcus had been waiting for over 2 hours. His initial frustration had simmered into a quiet but steady anger. The bustling energy of the bank had settled into a dull rhythm, punctuated by the occasional beep of a machine or the murmur of conversations. Yet, amid the routine chaos, something else was brewing, something Marcus hadn't anticipated. The other customers in the lobby were growing restless too, though not for the same reasons as Marcus. At first, they had seemed indifferent to his plight, absorbed in their own business. But as the minutes ticked by, it became impossible to ignore the glaring discrepancy in how people were being treated. The middle-aged man who had arrived nearly an hour after Marcus was already leaving, paperwork in hand, and a satisfied smile on his face. Even children accompanying their parents were ushered through quickly, while Marcus remained stuck in limbo. One elderly woman, seated across from him, finally broke the silence. "This is ridiculous," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "That gentleman has been here longer than anyone. What's going on?" Her voice carried a tone of disbelief mixed with indignation. She glanced at Marcus, then back at the reception desk, shaking her head. Others around her nodded in agreement, their expressions ranging from sympathetic to outright annoyed. A younger man sitting a few chairs away chimed in, leaning forward slightly. "Yeah, I noticed that too. Everyone else gets helped right away, but he's just sitting there." He gestured toward Marcus, his tone laced with irritation. "It doesn't make sense. Is this some kind of joke?" The murmurs grew louder, creating an undercurrent of tension in the room. Some customers began openly staring at Sarah, the bank manager, as if willing her to do something. Others whispered among themselves, speculating about what could possibly justify such blatant neglect. One teenager scrolling on her phone looked up briefly, rolled her eyes, and said, "Wow, that's messed up," before returning to her screen. Though her comment was brief, it added fuel to the growing unease in the air. Marcus tried to tune out the chatter, focusing instead on keeping his composure. He didn't want to appear rattled, even though every fiber of his being screamed for justice. Still, he couldn't deny that the murmurs gave him a strange sense of validation. These strangers, who didn't know him personally, recognized the unfairness of the situation. Their words weren't just idle complaints, they were affirmations that what was happening to him wasn't right. Meanwhile, Sarah seemed oblivious to the mounting disapproval, or perhaps she chose to ignore it. Her demeanor hadn't changed. She continued shuffling papers, answering calls, and occasionally glancing at her watch as if nothing unusual was occurring. When Marcus approached the desk yet again, trying one last time to get answers, her response was predictably dismissive. "Sir, please have a seat. We'll call you when we're ready," she said, her voice clipped and devoid of empathy. But this time, Marcus wasn't alone in his protest. The elderly woman who had spoken earlier stood up, gripping her cane tightly. "Excuse me, miss," she called out, her voice sharp and commanding. "How much longer is this gentleman going to wait? It's been 2 hours already. That's unacceptable." Sarah froze for a moment, caught off guard by the direct confrontation. She stammered slightly, attempting to deflect responsibility. "Ma'am, we're very busy today. There's nothing I can do about it." "That's nonsense," the woman shot back, her tone firm. "You've got plenty of staff running around helping everyone else. Don't tell me you don't have time for him." The exchange drew even more attention, turning heads throughout the lobby. People stopped pretending to mind their own business and openly watched the scene unfold. Some nodded in agreement with the elderly woman, while others exchanged knowing looks. The atmosphere shifted from passive observation to active disapproval, putting Sarah visibly on edge. As the tension reached its peak, Marcus felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him. On one hand, he appreciated the support from these strangers who had taken notice of his predicament. On the other hand, he hated that it had come to this, that a group of bystanders had to point out the obvious injustice for it to be acknowledged. He clenched his fists briefly, reminding himself to stay calm. This wasn't over yet, and he needed to keep his focus. Just as the confrontation threatened to escalate further, the glass doors of the bank swung open once again. 3 sharply dressed individuals walked in, exuding authority with every step. The sudden arrival diverted everyone's attention, including Sarah's. For a brief moment, the weight of the situation lifted slightly as all eyes turned to the sharp creak of the glass doors swinging open cut through the tense atmosphere like a knife. 3 figures strode into the bank, their presence commanding immediate attention. Dressed in tailored suits and polished shoes, they carried an air of authority that made everyone pause, even Sarah, who had been so preoccupied moments earlier. The trio moved with purpose, their eyes scanning the room as if assessing every detail. At first glance, Marcus assumed they were high-profile clients or perhaps executives visiting the branch for a routine inspection. But when one of them, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a warm smile, locked eyes with him, his heart skipped a beat. It was Charles Whittaker, a name Marcus recognized instantly. Charles wasn't just any executive. He was a prominent figure within Capital Trust Bank, known not only for his leadership but also for his outspoken advocacy for diversity and inclusion. And to Marcus's astonishment, Charles seemed to recognize him too. "Marcus," Charles exclaimed, his voice carrying across the lobby as he extended his hand. "What a pleasant surprise. I didn't expect to see you here today." For a moment, Marcus was speechless. He hadn't seen Charles in years, not since they'd briefly crossed paths at a local business conference where Marcus had given a presentation on entrepreneurship in underserved communities. Back then, Charles had praised his work, calling it inspiring and impactful. Now, standing face to face again, Marcus felt a mix of relief and disbelief. Relief because someone finally acknowledged him, and disbelief because this encounter felt almost surreal after hours of being ignored. As Marcus shook Charles's hand, he quickly explained his situation. "I've been waiting for over 2 hours," he said, his tone measured but laced with frustration. "I had an appointment scheduled, but no one has helped me yet. I don't understand what's going on." Charles listened intently, his expression shifting from surprise to concern. Glancing toward the reception desk, he noticed Sarah watching them nervously. Her confident demeanor from earlier had vanished, replaced by visible discomfort. Charles turned back to Marcus and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "This is unacceptable," he said firmly. "Let's get to the bottom of this right now." Before Marcus could respond, Charles introduced him to the other 2 board members accompanying him, a woman named Evelyn Carter, who oversaw community outreach initiatives, and a younger man named Ryan Patel, responsible for risk management. Both greeted Marcus warmly, clearly familiar with his reputation. Evelyn even remarked, "Your startup has been making waves lately. We've heard great things about your work." Their words provided a stark contrast to the treatment Marcus had endured all morning. For the first time that day, he felt truly valued, not as a random customer, but as someone whose contributions mattered. Yet the disparity between his experience and theirs highlighted the absurdity of the situation. Here he was, a respected entrepreneur, reduced to feeling invisible simply because of how he looked. Meanwhile, Sarah scrambled to regain control of the narrative. She hurried over to the group, her usual confidence replaced by awkward stammering. "Mr. Whittaker, we weren't expecting you today," she began, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How can I assist you?" Charles didn't mince words. "You can start by explaining why Mr. Thompson has been kept waiting for 2 hours despite having a confirmed appointment," he replied coolly. His tone was polite but firm, leaving no room for excuses. Sarah faltered, glancing around as if searching for help. "There must have been a misunderstanding," she offered weakly. "We've been incredibly busy today." "Busy enough to ignore a scheduled appointment?" Charles interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "That doesn't sound like the level of service our customers deserve, does it?" The weight of his question hung heavily in the air. Sarah's face flushed red, and she shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny of not only Charles, but also the growing audience of customers who had gathered nearby. Whispers rippled through the crowd, some expressing shock, others nodding in agreement with Charles' pointed remarks. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice calm but authoritative. "Let's take this conversation somewhere private," she suggested, gesturing toward a nearby conference room. "We can discuss this further and ensure Mr. Thompson gets the attention he deserves." Marcus hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to expect next. But seeing the determination in Charles's eyes and the clear discomfort on Sarah's face, he nodded. As they moved toward the conference room, he couldn't help but notice the shift in dynamics. Just moments ago, he had felt powerless and dismissed. Now, surrounded by influential figures willing to advocate for him, he felt a renewed sense of hope. Whatever. The conference room was quiet but charged with tension as Marcus, Charles, Evelyn, and Ryan settled into their seats. The stark contrast between this private space and the chaotic lobby outside was palpable. Here there were no murmurs from disgruntled customers or the hum of bank operations. Just 4 people seated around a polished wooden table, the weight of the situation pressing down on them all. Charles wasted no time getting to the heart of the matter. "Marcus," he began, his tone warm yet serious, "I want you to know how sorry I am that this happened. This is not the experience we strive to provide for our clients, especially someone like you who has contributed so much to your community. Marcus nodded slowly, appreciating the sincerity in Charles's voice. Still, he couldn't shake the frustration that had built up over the past 2 hours. "Thank you for saying that," he replied, choosing his words carefully. "But it's hard not to feel like this wasn't just an accident. It felt deliberate, like I didn't belong here." His honesty hung in the air, forcing everyone at the table to confront the uncomfortable truth. Evelyn leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "We take these matters very seriously," she said. "Our company has made commitments to fostering inclusivity and fairness, and hearing about incidents like this makes us realize we still have work to do." Ryan, who had been quieter until now, added his perspective. "It's one thing to talk about values during meetings, but actions speak louder than words. What happened today goes against everything we claim to stand for." As they spoke, Marcus noticed something important. These weren't empty platitudes. Each member of the board seemed genuinely disturbed by what he'd endured. Their body language, leaning in attentively, maintaining eye contact, showed they were listening, not just going through the motions. For the first time since entering the bank, Marcus felt truly heard. Charles turned his attention back to Marcus. "Let's address the immediate issue," he said. "You came here for a reason, to discuss your loan application. I've reviewed some of the materials you submitted online, and I can tell you right now, your proposal is impressive. There's no reason to delay approval any further." Marcus blinked, caught off guard by the sudden turn of events. Just hours ago, he'd been sitting in the lobby, ignored and disrespected. Now, the same people who should have assisted him earlier were offering not only an apology, but also a solution. "Are you saying?" he started, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "Yes," Charles confirmed with a small smile. "Consider your loan approved. We'll process the paperwork immediately, so you can move forward without another unnecessary delay." The relief that washed over Marcus was indescribable. All the stress, anger, and uncertainty melted away in that moment. He hadn't expected such a swift resolution, but more importantly, he hadn't expected justice to feel so validating. Still, he knew this wasn't just about him. It was about holding the bank accountable for its failures. "I appreciate that," Marcus said, his voice steady. "But I hope this isn't just about fixing my situation. If other people are being treated the way I was today, then this needs to change. Not just here, but everywhere." Evelyn nodded emphatically. "Absolutely. That's why we're going to launch an internal review of this branch, and others, to ensure nothing like this happens again. We'll also be implementing mandatory training programs for staff on bias and customer service. You deserve better, and so does everyone else." Charles added, "And we'd like your help, Marcus. Would you consider joining our advisory council? Your insights could be invaluable in shaping policies that promote equity and respect across all levels of our organization." Marcus paused, considering the offer. On one hand, he wanted nothing more than to leave the bank and put this day behind him. But on the other hand, he recognized the opportunity to make a real difference, not just for himself, but for others who might face similar challenges. After a moment, he nodded. "I'd be honored to help," he said, "but only if you're serious about making lasting changes." "We are," Charles assured him. "This isn't just lip service. Today proved that we need voices like yours to guide us." As the meeting drew to a close, Marcus left the conference room feeling a mix of emotions. Exhaustion lingered from the ordeal, but it was overshadowed by a renewed sense of purpose. What had started as a frustrating morning had transformed into a chance to hold powerful institutions accountable, and maybe even inspire meaningful change. Outside the conference room, Sarah stood nervously near the entrance, her face pale. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but Charles gave her a look that silenced her instantly. Whatever consequences awaited her, Marcus knew she wouldn't. As Marcus stepped out of the conference room with Charles, Evelyn, and Ryan, the atmosphere in the bank had shifted dramatically. The once busy lobby now seemed eerily quiet, as if everyone sensed that something significant had just occurred behind closed doors. Sarah stood near the reception desk, her hands clasped tightly together, her face pale and drawn. She looked like someone bracing for impact, and in many ways she was. Charles didn't waste a moment. With a firm but controlled tone, he addressed Sarah directly, his voice carrying just enough authority to make her flinch. "Miss Collins," he began, pausing to let his words sink in, "I need you to explain what happened here today. Why was Mr. Thompson kept waiting for 2 hours despite having a confirmed appointment?" Sarah swallowed hard, clearly struggling to find an answer that wouldn't dig her deeper into trouble. It was a busy morning," she stammered, glancing at the board members one by one. "There were a lot of customers, and I thought—" "You thought what?" Charles interrupted, his tone sharpening slightly. "That because Mr. Thompson is black, his time wasn't as valuable as everyone else's. Is that what you thought?" The accusation hit like a thunderclap, silencing the few remaining murmurs in the lobby. Sarah's eyes widened, and she shook her head frantically. "No, of course not. I would never." "Then what exactly did you think?" Evelyn chimed in, her voice calm but piercing. "Because from where we're standing, it looks like neglect, and possibly discrimination, and neither of those aligns with our values as a company." Ryan added his perspective, his tone measured but unyielding. "Let's be clear, this isn't about being busy. If it were, you'd have treated every customer equally. Instead, we saw a pattern. Every other client who walked in after Mr. Thompson was helped promptly, while he sat here for 2 hours without so much as an acknowledgement. That's not acceptable." Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Her shoulders slumped in defeat, and for the first time, she seemed genuinely remorseful, or perhaps it was fear setting in, fear of losing her job or facing disciplinary action. Either way, her earlier dismissive attitude was gone, replaced by a visible sense of shame. Charles turned to Marcus, gesturing toward Sarah. "Do you want to say anything to her?" he asked gently. It was a rare opportunity, a chance for Marcus to confront the person who had wronged him directly. Marcus hesitated, weighing his options. Part of him wanted to unleash the frustration he'd felt all morning, to demand answers and hold her accountable for her actions. But another part of him recognized that lashing out wouldn't solve anything. Instead, he took a deep breath and spoke calmly, though his words carried undeniable weight. "I don't know why you treated me the way you did," he said, meeting her gaze steadily. "But what I do know is that your behavior made me feel invisible, like I didn't matter. And whether it was intentional or not, the impact was the same. That's not how anyone should be treated, especially when they come here seeking help." Sarah nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I truly am. I never meant to make you feel that way." While her apology sounded sincere, Marcus knew it wouldn't erase the pain of the past 2 hours, or the larger issues it represented. Still, he appreciated the gesture, even if it felt too little, too late. Turning back to Charles and the others, he said, "Thank you for addressing this. But I hope this doesn't end with just an apology. Real change needs to happen, not just here, but across the entire organization." Charles nodded firmly. "It will," he promised. "Starting today, we're launching a full investigation into this branch's operations. We'll review staff conduct, assess training protocols, and ensure that incidents like this never happen again. Additionally, Ms. Collins will be suspended pending further review, and we'll determine appropriate next steps based on our findings." The announcement sent ripples through the lobby. Some customers exchanged approving nods, while others whispered among themselves, clearly satisfied with the swift response. For Sarah, however, the news was devastating. She lowered her head, visibly shaken, as a supervisor escorted her to a private office to discuss the situation further. As the initial shock wore off, Marcus felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him: relief, vindication, and even a touch of sadness. For Sarah, whose career might now be in jeopardy, and for himself, who had endured such blatant disrespect simply because of the color of his skin. Yet amidst it all, there was also hope. Hope that this incident would spark meaningful change, not just within the bank, but beyond it. With the board members by his side, Marcus walked toward the exit, feeling a renewed sense of news of what happened at Capital Trust Bank spread faster than anyone could have anticipated. By late afternoon, whispers in the lobby had turned into full-blown conversations online and offline. Social media buzzed with posts from witnesses who had been at the bank that morning, sharing their accounts of how Marcus Thompson, a respected entrepreneur, had been made to wait for 2 hours while others were served promptly. The story quickly gained traction, fueled by hashtags like #JusticeForMarcus and #AccountabilityMatters. Local news outlets picked up the story, framing it as a glaring example of systemic bias within corporate institutions. Reporters reached out to Marcus for comment, but he chose his words carefully. "This isn't just about me," he told one journalist during a brief phone interview. "It's about ensuring that no one else has to go through what I did. Discrimination, whether intentional or not, has no place in our society." The bank's executive board acted swiftly to control the narrative. Later that evening, they issued a public statement acknowledging the incident and outlining steps they planned to take to address it. "We deeply regret the treatment Mr. Thompson experienced today," the statement read. "Such behavior is unacceptable and does not reflect the values we strive to uphold. We are committed to making meaningful changes, including comprehensive staff training, policy reviews, and greater accountability measures." While some praised the bank for its transparency, others remained skeptical. Critics argued that apologies and promises weren't enough. They wanted concrete actions. Community leaders joined the conversation, calling for more than just internal investigations. "This is an opportunity for Capital Trust Bank to lead by example," said Andrea Lopez, a local activist known for her work on racial equity. "But talk is cheap. They need to prove they're serious about change." For Marcus, the day was far from over. After leaving the bank, he found himself reflecting on everything that had transpired. He felt a mix of emotions: anger at how he'd been treated, gratitude for the support he'd received, and determination to turn this painful experience into something positive. That evening, he sat down at his desk and began drafting a letter, not to the bank, but to the broader community. In the letter, Marcus shared his story openly, describing the frustration and invisibility he'd felt during those 2 long hours. But rather than dwell on bitterness, he focused on solutions. "What happened today reminded me that progress isn't always easy," he wrote. "But it also showed me the power of standing up for what's right. To the people who spoke out on my behalf, thank you. And to those who faced similar challenges, know that your voice matters. Together, we can create a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect." The letter resonated deeply, going viral within hours. People from all walks of life shared it, praising Marcus for his grace under pressure and his commitment to driving change. Even Sarah Collins's suspension became a topic of discussion, with many debating whether punishment alone was enough to address systemic issues. Some argued that retraining and education were better approaches, while others believed consequences were necessary to send a clear message. Meanwhile, Charles Whittaker kept his promise. Within days, Capital Trust Bank announced the formation of a new advisory council dedicated to promoting inclusivity and fairness, and Marcus was invited to serve as its inaugural chairperson. At the first meeting, he laid out bold ideas: implementing anonymous feedback systems for customers, conducting regular audits of employee interactions, and partnering with organizations focused on diversity and inclusion. As weeks passed, the ripple effects of that fateful day continued to unfold. Employees at the downtown branch attended mandatory workshops on unconscious bias and customer service. Signs were posted throughout the bank reminding staff of their responsibility to treat every client equally. And slowly but surely, small yet meaningful changes began to take root. For Marcus, The journey was far from finished. While he was proud of the strides being made, he knew true transformation would require ongoing effort. Still, as he looked back on that chaotic morning, he couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. What had started as a personal ordeal had evolved into a catalyst for change, one that inspired countless others to demand better, not just from banks, but from every institution entrusted with serving the public. And though the road ahead promised challenges, Marcus walked it with his head held high, knowing he'd already sparked something extraordinary. The weeks that followed the incident at Capital Trust Bank became a turning point, not just for Marcus, but for the entire community. What had started as an ordinary Tuesday morning turned into a catalyst for conversations about fairness, accountability, and systemic change. The story of Marcus Thompson's ordeal spread far beyond the walls of the bank, sparking debates in workplaces, schools, and homes across the city. In the days after the incident, Sarah Collins' suspension dominated headlines. Some people sympathized with her, believing she deserved a second chance to learn from her mistakes. Others argued that her actions reflected deeper issues within the banking industry and called for stricter consequences. Regardless of where people stood, one thing was clear: her behavior had exposed cracks in a system many had taken for granted. It forced everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about how biases, whether conscious or unconscious, can shape interactions in ways that harm individuals and erode trust. For Marcus, life didn't return to normal. It evolved. He found himself thrust into the spotlight, not because he sought attention, but because his resilience inspired others. Local businesses invited him to speak at events, eager to hear his perspective on leadership and advocacy. Community groups asked him to lead workshops on overcoming adversity and using personal experiences to drive positive change. At first, Marcus hesitated, unsure if he wanted to relive the pain of that day repeatedly. But as he spoke to more audiences, he realized the power of storytelling. Sharing his journey wasn't just cathartic for him. It gave others permission to share their own stories of discrimination and injustice. At Capital Trust Bank, the changes promised by the executive board began taking shape. Anonymous feedback kiosks were installed in every branch, allowing customers to report concerns without fear of retaliation. Employees underwent rigorous training sessions designed to address bias and improve customer service. Most importantly, the advisory council chaired by Marcus introduced policies requiring regular audits of client interactions to ensure equitable treatment. These measures weren't perfect, but they marked significant progress, a step toward rebuilding trust. Word of the bank's efforts reached other financial institutions, prompting them to examine their own practices. Competitors announced similar initiatives, vowing to prioritize inclusivity and transparency. For Marcus, this ripple effect was proof that individual actions could spark broader movements. It's not just about fixing one problem, he often said during interviews. It's about creating systems that prevent those problems from happening in the first place. As months passed, the impact of Marcus's experience extended beyond corporate reforms. Schools incorporated his story into lessons about empathy and standing up against injustice. Social media campaigns encouraged people to reflect on their own biases and challenge discriminatory behaviors when they saw them. Even Sarah Collins, whose career hung precariously in the balance, reportedly enrolled in diversity training programs and volunteered with organizations promoting workplace equality. Despite the progress, Marcus remained grounded. He knew the fight for equity was ongoing and that setbacks would inevitably arise. But he also understood the importance of celebrating victories, no matter how small. One evening, as he sat in his office overlooking the city skyline, he thought about how far he'd come since that frustrating morning at the bank. His tech startup was thriving, thanks in part to the loan that had finally been approved. More importantly, his voice had become a beacon of hope for countless others. Looking ahead, Marcus envisioned a future where stories like his wouldn't make headlines because such incidents would be rare, or better yet, non-existent. Until then, he vowed to keep pushing for change, knowing that even the smallest actions could inspire others to do the same. As he closed his laptop and prepared to leave for the day, he smiled to himself. That morning at the bank may have begun with frustration and invisibility, but it ended with empowerment and purpose. And for Marcus, that made all the difference.